Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to Sunday Live in the Garden with me, Aislynn, and my favorite creative partner on the backside of that camera back there, that's Joe.
Hello.
Hello. We are on Freedom Harvest Farms today. We were here last week and we've been out here quite a bit lately, and the reason is, for those of you that are regular watchers of this program, we are moving our life about 25 minutes from where we live out onto Freedom Harvest Farms in Taft, Texas. We live on the coast of Texas and we grow grapes. And this year, I and Joe are getting to harvest all the grapes just because of the way the timing all worked out this year. And so I want to spend some time talking about the timing of fruit production, harvesting fruit. I want to talk about the creatures we need to be aware of when we're harvesting fruit. And I want to talk about how coastal flooding can affect fruiting in our particular region of Texas. And then how, when you're dealing with other types of floodings in the area you are, whether you're on the coast or whether you're somewhere else and there's other types of flooding going on, certain types of things that you can do to make sure that you get as much fruit as you possibly can when we end up in a very, very wet summer. This has been a crazy year. Everything has been different. The freeze actually caused the grapes to set later. So we're just now harvesting this set in the middle of torrential rain that we've been having over the last like 4 or 5 days down here. And so it was time to get those off, and that's what we've been working on today. So first thing I need to do is go ahead and dump these buckets off into our little catch system. We're still pretty small scale with our wine grapes at this point. So what we're doing right now is getting them ready to be washed because the creatures are real. Come over here and look. Let's see what we can see in here if we run into anything. Yesterday, I posted a video of a toad. Well, the interesting thing about that toad was it was actually in a cabbage that I'd harvested. Look, there's a ladybug. So as we turn the water on, when we get ready to harvest, when we get ready to process these grapes, what we're doing right now is we're just putting them in a cold room. Okay? Let me dump this one more bucket out right here.
I guess we've been at it about 40 minutes and got 8 5-gallon buckets worth.
Yes, exactly. So the reason I'm putting them in here, in this room, we're using this as a cold room. Step by step, this farm is becoming a great little production spot for us to primarily harvest foods for our family, but then also to create an overflow of abundance that helps to create some cash flow that gives us the ability to keep living the types of lifestyle that we want to live out here on our farm. So what this is at the end of the day, what this is going to be is an actual air-conditioned outhouse that's close to the pavilion that we use for farm-to-table events when we do those. But in the current step that we're in, it is literally just an air-conditioned room. So we're turning on the air conditioning, we're putting the grapes in here, and then when we get ready to process them, we'll pull them out of these what do you call these things? Kiddie pools?
Baby pool, kiddie pool.
We'll pull them out of the kiddie pools, we'll rush them with water, fill them up with water, clean them, make sure we get all of the insects out, and then we have a processor now, actually a new processor my dad just purchased, that will help us press the grapes, and then he can bottle up that grape juice and ferment it to make wine. A red blended wine is what he likes to make. These grapes are actually the Spanish Lenoir grape. Let's go over and look at them.
You driving?
Yeah, let's drive. Let's take everybody on a ride.
That's
Go ahead. You can talk.
No, I think that you're going to engine noise will drown it out. So we'll get over there and continue. Big fig tree.
Yeah, we'll talk about the fig tree.
It's got about 4 grape vining systems. You call the wire situation a system.
Sending water. As we drove past these 2 grapevines, one of the things Joe and I were just talking about was the idea that one grapevine looks different than the other grapevine So you can tell the health even side by side of plants, and the ones that are really thriving and the ones that have had a more challenging time. So you can see that this one didn't get as big and full. They're also not as ripe, but they are actually dropping a lot of their seeds, as opposed to this one over here that has a lot more full, really nice big full grapes on it. Now this is the Spanish Lenoir grape. It is a grape that grows really well in our region of South Texas. It can handle the clay. It can also handle the sand, or even the sandy loam, of which we have a little bit of all of that down here on the coast. In addition to that, we also grow the Concord grape, and we have, I believe it's a Champanelle, which was actually an accidental grape. Now the Concord and the Spanish Lenoir, the Concord and the Spanish Lenoir are actually red grapes. So this is where you begin to be able to create a blend, a red blend, which my dad's been making wine now with these Spanish Lenoir grapes for probably six years or so, slowly but surely adding more grapevines, and then seeing how that year worked out. So in 2017,
a slow measured ramp up of production. Yeah.
Exactly. And as he's, in the midst of building the farm, creating the infrastructure, and actually living out here on the farm, this is a project, the fruit trees that we have and the vines were a project that he knew, kind of that old Chinese proverb, the best day to plant a tree or a grapevine is today, the second best day is tomorrow. So if you keep that in mind, no matter what you're doing on your property, get your fruit vines and your fruit trees in as soon as you possibly can, because it's going to take them a lot of time to develop anyways. And in the midst of that, you're going to have a lot of failure. You're going to have a lot of mistakes. We've got trees that we've lost. And then you're also going to run into, as you hear me talk about every week, this crazy violent weather that we deal with down here on the coast. So like in 2017, as I mentioned a minute ago, we had a hurricane down here, Hurricane Harvey. This farm did get hit by the eastern eye wall even, right? I believe that's where we were at the very edge of the
southern eye wall.
Southern eye wall. The southern eye wall? Okay. Anyways, but we were on the kind of the east side of the storm, and we were hit by it. So there were things that were affected. And so the year of wine that was made from the 2017 vintage, is that the right word? Vintage was the flavor of what happened that year. So that's something to keep in mind when you're purchasing wine. Now, of course, when you're talking about large scale mechanical industrial systems, there's absolutely more efficiency and consistency, and they're keeping those grapes getting exactly as much as they can. But at the same time, there's still going to be weather events that are going to change the flavor of the wine. So that's something. So sometimes what will happen is they'll actually pull. So Josh is a good example. We drink a lot of Josh Cabernet. That's one of my favorites. And one of the things that we've noticed is they'll pull a reserve. So what that often happens is they had some kind of interesting weather event or something that changed the flavor and made it special and made it something that really tastes. They had less variety. They had less quantity of it because maybe that year the grapes didn't produce as well, or that particular side of the farm had more water than this side of the farm, those kinds of things. And so those are things to keep in mind when we're just talking about our fruit and how our fruit sets and how it's flavored and all of those types of things. So that comes back to us having dealt with freeze and flood this particular season from February through July, which is the big fruiting season in South Texas. So the trees and everything set fruit late, but they actually had cold hours, chill hours. They call them chill hours. So when you're planting trees for our area, if you live in Zone 9B area, take a look. Make sure you're purchasing trees and fruit vines and things like that match our region and match our climate, but also look at number of chill hours and get an idea of whether or not we have an opportunity to get those chill hours or not. That being said, one of the biggest things I've learned, and I hope that a lot of other farmers in our country and in our world and on the coast are learning as well, and that is to diversify your crops. Diversifying your crops, and if you're talking about a backyard, situation, just make sure you have a diverse variety of different types of fruiting trees, different types of grapes, things like that, because one might do really, really well in the crazy freeze year because of those chill hours, like a peach tree or a plum tree, while others might not do as well that particular season. And so you don't have the production you normally have, you have a different production, but it gives you a nice variety of different kinds of fruits. And when you're talking about backyard gardening or homesteading, really what you're looking for is variety over quantity. You're looking for quality and quantity, and you're looking for an expansion of growth of all the things you want to eat in your household to try to keep you from having to go to the grocery store as often as possible. So diversification is a very important part of that. So as we're looking over here at some of the fruiting, like June, July is about the time we start pulling the pears off the trees down here. This pear tree is literally losing fruit full and splitting open.
Is that the split because of the massive rain?
Absolutely.
Oh, interesting.
So what happens is that before they really are completely ripened, they begin to split from the from how much water is in them. So we're going to go ahead and harvest these, even though we might have been able to leave them on a little bit longer. We're going to go ahead and harvest these today because they are breaking the limbs and they are getting kind of moldy inside there in some of those spaces. So the other trees that did really well for us this year are the fig trees. Let's walk down here. This is a young fig tree down here. So this is kind of a first season, second season set of fruit for this LSU fig, and you can tell that it's not quite ready. So this might be where what you might call your bumper crop of harvest of figs, because the almonds and the Celeste have set really well. So this is what these will begin to look like when they're ready to ripen, but they actually will get much bigger and they're a big purple fruit. One of the things I've been hearing from a lot of people has to do with the amount of moisture that's in a fruit, and one of the things I've learned this season because of the rain is getting a better understanding of, just like with the grapes of when to harvest them and the pears, how much water is in the fruit affects what you can actually do with the fruit. So the fruit that was coming off of the fig tree during the rains was full of water and could go into fermentation very quickly, needed to be cooked very quickly, and that's really the only thing that you could do with them. But now we're getting back into a portion of the year where if we lose the heavy rains that we're sitting in, the flooding rains that we're sitting in, the figs may have a second little bumper crop, especially with some of these younger trees that I'm able to pull off of as well. We also have apple trees out here. The apple trees don't do as well because we're in that clay soil and because of how much water this land actually does hold. They don't like to be muddy feeded, okay? So like your root system, you've dug out a hole, you've planted your tree in there, and because clay is so hard, it creates a barrier. Once the tree hits the barrier of what you've created when you dug it a hole out, it then just stops growing and starts kind of going back around on itself, almost like as if it was inside of a pot. And then what'll happen is water will just sit, because we have water out here. I mean, if you dug, we are at sea level at this point, okay? We are saturated to the highest point. If we dug a hole, it would fill with water. So that's what's happening in the roots of this apple tree this year. So the timing of the apple tree actually did work out well for us this year, kind of accidentally. I've been encouraging less people, especially if they're in more clay areas, to plant apple trees, even if you're planting the right variety for our region. If you're in heavy clay like we are, they get rotten really fast. But because we have the trees and we have some ability to diversify and we have some ability to keep an eye on it and decide what is the best time to harvest those fruits, we actually were able to get a nice 5-gallon bucket full of apples that mostly came off of this tree and maybe one other tree that were in really good condition at the end of June, or in June. I think it was about June time. And that's merely because of the freeze. The freeze actually dried things up, got the tree a little bit healthier, and then we had a drought of a few weeks, which was the perfect timing for that plant to set its hard fruit and for us to harvest it and get some good stuff of it. If we had left it even just a few days longer and then into the flooding again, we would have had nothing but rotten fruit coming out of there. So yeah, so some other things to keep in mind, and we'll walk over here to my other gardens and we'll talk about melons. and squash and pumpkins, which are all fruits, tomatoes for that matter. All fruits that when we're dealing with this amount of water, we have to keep in mind, A, the splitting that we've been talking about, and B, the flavor. So things, your peppers for that matter, your melons, your cantaloupes, your watermelons, all of those things need to be watched carefully for splitting, and also watched carefully, lots of water, watch, and then also just keeping in mind that the flavor is probably not going to be very sweet, okay? That being said, when we go back to the conversation of diversification, when you plant a lot of variety, you get to know which things do well in what weather. So this one I've noticed, this is the, it's a silver, quicksilver, something like that. It's actually not a watermelon or a cantaloupe. It's what they would call an exotic melon.
It looks like a watermelon.
It looks like a watermelon. The one that we got was actually a big, like 10-inch.
Yeah, 10-inch diameter.
This is about as big
dinosaur
as it's
egg.
supposed to get. But it had gotten really, really big, and the meat wasn't even hardly orange. The meat's supposed to be orange, but it wasn't really orange. It was more white. Consistency not of a cantaloupe, but more like a watermelon. There's another one in here. You see it? Mm-hmm. And it's an extremely, extremely beautiful tasting fruit. So while I'm over there taking off the other types of cantaloupes and things like that and tasting them, how did the cantaloupe taste that you cut up the other day?
It was not sweet.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all.
Too much water, I suppose.
So diversification in the types and the varieties of things you grow is really important because different things handle water in different ways. One of the other ones you've heard me talk about a lot is the tromboncino. Come back over here, I'll show you one. The tromboncino, the ones that I planted on a fence line, they grow really long and big. So these ones that are in kind of a bushing situation grow a little more curled. I keep an eye out for when they begin touching the ground down there because I don't want the end of them to get rotten. And I can harvest those off, but they're handling this weather pretty well. I want to talk about a few more other fruits that we're getting into with the orchard and all of that as well, but I also want to go back to the idea that there are a lot of creatures. When there's a lot of water, there's a lot of life, okay? And because of that, when you're out harvesting things, when you're moving around in your overabundance, overflow of plants and things like that, you need to be aware that there absolutely are creatures in there. So as I mentioned earlier, I harvested one of my last big, nice, fat cabbage heads, threw it in a bucket, and a toad jumped out into the bucket. It was inside the cabbage. And that's the video you guys got to see earlier. But that's something to keep in mind. But not only are you going to run into friendly things like toads and awesome little green garden snakes and awesome little rat snakes that are eating the rats that are potentially eating your cantaloupes and your melons and things like that, or your beautiful peppers or whatever. You're also going to run into hornets and yellow jackets and all of those types of things. My best answer for that so far I've found for me is to use a yellow washing glove, just like this, super simple. And then I actually do always wear a long sleeve shirt that I can button up so that I make sure that if I get my hands into something, even fire ants for that matter, it helps me. Now I don't do a lot of that when I'm out just gardening. I don't use my gloves a lot. But I will notice that I'm running into yellow jacket mounds, houses, and that's the issue with the yellow jacket. It's when you run into their house. So the trick is knowing where their houses are, knocking their houses down, and then moving them somewhere else, basically. Because you're gonna run into them accidentally if you're not careful, and the gloves can be very helpful at that. But you'll run into them on sunflowers as well. So as I've grown all these beautiful sunflowers out here, I've cut the major limbs off the bottoms of it so that I can be aware as I'm working out here and looking at things if there's a chance that I could be running into a yellow jacket nest or something like that. Now, I'm not a fan of just going out and killing everything. Most of you already know that about me, because they all have a beneficial purpose. There's a reason for all the different things out here. So yellow jackets and hornets are extremely important when you're having to face caterpillars, and it's caterpillar season. So the other creatures that we're dealing with are all these beautiful different types of caterpillars. And the caterpillars can be some that are destructive and a problem, like the BT worm. It's a big, fat, green worm with a little horn on its head, and actually has these little clamper feet, so when you go to grab it and pull it off of something, it tries to hold on, as opposed to other caterpillars that you just pull it off, right? These guys are like, no, I'm here, don't let me go, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Those actually turn into a very beautiful not wasp, what do you call that thing? Moth.
Moth?
Moth.
Moth?
A wolf moth. A big, beautiful
Vintage?
moth. And I love them. So what I tend to do is I keep an eye out for my tomato, because they love nightshades. Nightshades would be the datura you've seen me plant. Datura is actually a poisonous plant, but it attracts those BT worms, the nightshade plants. But the nightshade plants are also things like your peppers, your eggplants, your tomatoes. So this time of year, while all the things are coming to life, while at night the moths are laying their eggs all over things, and then all of a sudden it went from a tiny little green worm overnight to a big, fat, hungry caterpillar that's eating your entire tomato plant or eating. So the yellow jackets and the wasps actually help you with that, because they grab those young babies, they basically suck their goo out and then fly off with them or whatever. So that's kind of a fun adventure. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you have a lot of parsley and dill that's still growing in your gardens, and you've noticed a few pretty little striped caterpillars on there, my suggestion to you to make your garden a beautiful and loving space that you want to be in on a daily basis, and to grow the most abundance of fruit, is to leave those beautiful butterflies and caterpillars alone. That is actually the swallowtail butterfly. It's gorgeous. The caterpillars eat parsley and dill. That's their focus. The moms that are coming through that we're seeing everywhere are laying eggs all over your dill and parsley. So even if you don't see a caterpillar forming, if you flip your parsley over and look at the bottom of it, you're going to see these tiny little white eggs on there. That's actually those caterpillars. And a lot of people will ask me, well, they're eating all my dill, they're eating all my parsley. Plant more dill, plant more parsley. That's the answer. That's not a big deal. Parsley is super cheap when it comes to seed. Dill is super cheap. Once you get it planted, you're never going to get rid of it. It's going to keep growing. I use it as a cover crop at this point, and I actually feed the swallowtail butterflies and the monarch butterflies that way, rather than being upset that they're eating the one dill plant that I planted that I needed for my cucumbers to pickle my cucumbers.
While you talk, I'm just looking over at the garden, and there's a lot of life. A lot of those flying insects you were talking about.
So this is somewhere, yeah, I see this. Well, here's the squash beetles, but then there's also one that has a razor on its back. So if you got a lot of squash beetles, that's one you saw just fly by, stink bugs, things like that. You'll also see one that looks like it's like an armored, like same type of armor, but instead it has back here on the back, it has a raised like mound with like little spines on it. Leave those guys alone. Those are your friends. They will help. They're beneficial. They're very, very good at their job, but stay away from them because they can also sting you. They're not aggressive. They're not going to come after you like a yellow jacket is. However, if you step on them, sit on them, touch them, pinch them, knock their house down, they are going to come after you for sure and sting you, and it doesn't feel good. It can be very painful, in fact. So those are things to keep in mind. And like I said, see, I've got this nice sunflower growing here, and I was using it like, oh, actually I wanted to show you. Part of the reason I leave these sunflowers the way I leave them, even after I've cut the tops off or whatever, is because I do use them as a trellising system. So you can see I've got watermelon growing up here, and I actually harvested a melon off of one of these sunflowers just the other day, and it also wasn't sweet. That's what it is. So that's the thing with diversity, and like I said, growing different varieties is going to give you better. Okay, now the okra is finally starting to come on, which is perfect because I didn't plant it too early this year. I waited till the last minute, and now I can start harvesting okra when I'm starting to get to the end of a little bit of everything. So I've got this big, beautiful okra. All of this okra seed was harvested from last season, so I let my pods dry out, and then I bagged them up, and then when it came time to just throw seeds out really quick to fill, because this is where my potato bed was. I had all my potatoes here. So once I cleared my potatoes out, I needed to go back in and plant something in here. And you can see how this okra's here, and then I put in a few more squash plants and some okras here. And then back here, you actually run into just something that turned into just a cover crop row, which is perfectly fine as well. But but it was covered with buckwheat and alyssum. So I've just left it that way because at this point there's no reason not to. But as we've had all this beautiful rain and the temperatures have been so much slower, I actually have been going back in and planting some more peppers, some more tomatoes, lots of basil. I have been doing a little bit of seed planting as well. But just keeping in mind that if you're paying attention to the weather and you're actively working in your garden on a regular basis, it helps you to see those little opportunities that you might not have normally expected in July or in mid-July, which means that I'm going to have a really nice fall harvest of a lot of things because I've continued to keep working on it. So come in here, you can see how the water can begin to create real problems for your squash. So after things really start to dry out and I start to see what kind of mold is setting in and things like that, what kinds of insects I'm dealing with, I can go back in and clean these rows out, get all this stuff out of the way. Don't try to save plants that are not savable. Get rid of them. Get them out of there. And then you can begin to start getting, and as I mentioned before, creating space to plant for the next season. Whether it's your fruit trees, I wouldn't encourage you to put any fruit trees or fruit vines in the ground right now, even though I'm playing with seeds and plants and things like that. I have a lot of plants to play with and a lot of seeds to play with. But if you're planting anything like expensive, like a tree or a vine or whatever, anything like that, my best solution to planting those is going to be in late February or March. There's some suggestions that you can plant things in November, especially if we continue to have a rainy season. But this year, after it being a very, very dry winter with a hard freeze, a lot of young plants that were planted in November were lost. So March is going to give you all through March, no freezes, lots of water, and then you keep it alive through the summertime, depending on how much water we get in the summertime. The fall temperatures set in, and then it'll start to come out and be happy. And then after a few years, usually when you buy a plant from the nursery, it's about 2 or 3 years old, and it's really not going to really start setting good fruit until the 5th year, and then by the 7th year, you're in production. That's usually the timing of your big fruiting plants and stuff like that. Okay, that's all we have for today. I guess you didn't see any questions or anything like that. Not that they were good or bad questions. Thank you all so much for joining me out here at the farm. Thank you all so much. I hope that if you're catching this live, maybe you'll share it with a friend that you think might be interested in this. If you're catching it on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel, like, comment. If you have questions, please, it's a great place to ask me questions. I love this public opportunity to answer questions and help you guys out. I was super excited to get a question from New York just the other day about basil. And I was like, New York? Somebody's asking a Texan from the coast of Texas from New York about basil? I can answer that question. So that was a lot of fun. So yes, reach out to me. I'm looking forward to communicating with you, and let's grow this beautiful, beautiful new earth that we're all creating here together. On that note, don't forget that tomorrow we launch the 50th episode of season 2.
46, 47.
46, 47. Okay, we're getting close. 46, 47 episode of Dinner Table Talks, the podcast that Joe and I do, where we talk about literally anything that comes up at our dinner table. Literally this week, it gets pretty intimate. So you're going to want to check it out. We love you guys. We hope you have the best Sunday ever and enjoy all the beautiful fruits that are coming out of your garden and out of your life. I love you.